I've lived 49 winters in the Yukon, where silence has a sound of its own. Up here, the nights are so cold they make the stars tremble. My cabin stands on the edge of a frozen lake, surrounded by pines that whisper when the wind moves through them. I thought I had seen everything nature could show a man until that night in February. It was close to midnight. I was sitting by the wood stove drinking coffee gone lukewarm when the dog started barking like the world was ending. I stepped outside and the air bit into my skin. Then I saw it, a streak of white fire slicing the sky, leaving a tail of blue sparks behind it. It wasn't like any meteor I'd ever seen. It didn't burn out. It descended slowly, deliberately, as if controlled. And when it vanished beyond the tree line, the ground trembled under my boots. For a long moment I just stood there, breath hanging in the air, heart racing. Then the light went out completely, and all I could hear was the wind moving through the branches. Every instinct told me to stay inside, but something else, something stronger, told me to go. I grabbed my flashlight, my coat, and an old rifle I keep for bears. The snow was knee-deep and heavy, but I followed the faint trail of smoke that rose against the pale northern sky. The further I walked, the stranger the air felt, like electricity before a storm. When I reached the clearing, I saw it. Half buried in the snow was a craft, no bigger than a pickup, but shaped like nothing I'd ever seen. Its surface shimmered between silver and dark blue, alive with faint pulses of light. One side was torn open, steaming. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. Then I saw him. At first I thought it was a man in a suit thrown clear of the wreckage. But when I got closer, my breath caught. His skin was pale, not white, but almost translucent, like light passing through water. His eyes were large, but not monstrous. They looked human. In fact, they looked more human than any I'd ever seen. Deep, sorrowful, ancient. He was breathing fast, struggling, one hand pressed to his chest. Without thinking, I dropped the rifle and knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" I asked, my voice shaking. He turned his head slowly toward me and in a calm, clear tone said in perfect English, "Do not be afraid." I froze. His lips barely moved, yet I heard the words, not just in my ears, but in my mind. I wanted to run. Every story, every warning from childhood screamed in my head, but something about his voice, the gentleness of it, made me stay. I wrapped my coat around him, and for a second he smiled. His skin was cold, almost icy, but when our eyes met, I felt warmth flood through me. "Who are you?" I whispered. He hesitated, then said, "A traveler, from where your prophets once looked for signs." I didn't understand what that meant. My hands trembled as I helped him to his feet. His body was light, almost weightless. I led him back through the forest, toward my cabin, unsure if I was saving him or walking into something beyond reason. When we reached the porch, he looked up at the northern sky, the aurora flickering faintly green, and said softly, "The heavens are opening again." Inside, I laid him by the stove, fed the fire, and watched steam rise from his clothes. The dogs hid under the table whining. He looked at me as if studying my soul, then murmured, "You have done what few still do. You helped without asking." Those words pierced me deeper than I can explain. Outside, the wind howled across the lake, and I realized I was no longer afraid. I was in the presence of something sacred, something I couldn't name. That night, I didn't sleep. The man, or whatever he was, rested quietly by the fire. And while I sat there watching the flames dance across his face, I felt something awaken in me, a strange certainty that this meeting was not chance. It was a calling. When dawn came, the light outside was a thin silver glow over the snow. Inside my cabin, the stranger was still lying near the stove, breathing steadily. For a moment, I wondered if everything that had happened was a dream born from exhaustion or whiskey. But then he opened his eyes, clear, bright, and deeper than any color I knew, and I remembered. It was all real. He sat up slowly, looking around as if studying every detail. The tools hanging on the wall, the frost on the window, the old Bible resting on the table. "You live in silence," he said. His voice was calm, melodic, not from the throat, but from somewhere beyond sound. "I prefer it that way," I answered. My words felt clumsy next to his. "Who are you, really?" He looked at me for a long time before replying. "I am called Elior." The name itself carried a vibration, like a small echo in my chest. I asked where he came from. He looked out the window where the morning sun glinted on the frozen lake and said, "From where the messengers of your God once came." That line froze me. "You mean angels?" I asked, half laughing, half terrified. He tilted his head slightly, as if the word didn't quite fit. "We have been called many names by many worlds, but our task is always the same: to watch, to guide, to remember." My hands were shaking. I reached for my coffee just to have something to hold. "Guide who?" He turned to me then, and his gaze felt like light pressing on my skin. "Those who still carry compassion in their hearts." He said it so simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Yet the way he looked at me made my throat tighten. I wanted to understand, to make sense of it. "Why here? Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because you came when others would have hidden. You heard the call. You didn't even know you were answering it." His words hit something inside me, something I didn't know was still alive. I had spent years alone, after losing my wife to illness, after losing my faith in everything else. I had stopped praying, stopped hoping, and now this being, this Elior, was sitting in my home, speaking as if he knew my soul better than I did. He stood up, surprisingly steady for someone who had fallen from the sky. "I must repair my vessel," he said. "I cannot remain in this form long. The air here grows heavy for me." I followed him to the door. The cold hit like knives, but he didn't seem to feel it. We walked back through the snow to the clearing. The strange craft was still there, half buried, but now its surface shimmered like water in sunlight. Elior touched the metal and it responded. Lights flickered. The snow melted around his hand. Watching him work was like watching a man pray. Each movement was deliberate, gentle, reverent. After a while, he said quietly, without looking at me, "The heavens are stirring again. You will soon see signs in the skies that men will not understand, but the message will not be for the eyes, it will be for the heart." I didn't know how to respond. My breath clouded in the frozen air, and I felt both terrified and peaceful at the same time. "Is something coming?" I asked. He looked at me, truly looked. "Something has always been coming, but now it is near. The return of the light. What your scriptures call the second coming is not the arrival of a man, but the awakening of humanity itself." I stared at him, unable to speak. The way he said it, so calm, so certain, made disbelief impossible. He reached out, placed his hand over my heart. His touch was warm, despite the cold. "Fear not, Daniel," he said softly. "When the light returns, those who carry kindness will recognize him instantly. They will not need to see him descend, they will feel him rise within." Then, for the first time, I felt tears running down my face. Not from fear, from something else, something like remembering who I really was. Elior smiled gently. "You are beginning to understand." By midday, the cold had sharpened, the kind that fractures logs with a single swing and turns breath to glass. Elior stood ankle-deep in the churned snow beside the craft, hands hovering inches above the torn seam in its hull. Where his palms passed, frost hissed to vapor, and the metal knit itself in ripples like water catching up to a boat's wake. I'd fixed engines my whole life, but I'd never seen repair behave like mercy. "Tell me what to do," I said, because standing there useless felt like betrayal. He glanced back at me with that patient half-smile. "Hold the field steady. Think of stillness." Stillness. I'd spent years chasing it. Whiskey one year, rage the next, then silence so complete I forgot the sound of my own laugh. Now, he wanted me to think it. I set both hands on a smooth panel where he pointed. The metal thrummed under my fingertips, a low vibration like a distant choir. For a moment my mind scattered, lists, worries, the ache behind my ribs that never fully left, but the hum gathered the fragments and smoothed them flat. The craft brightened. Fine filaments, almost like spider silk made of light, rose from the seam and braided themselves shut. Elior worked without hurry, and the snowstorm brewing over the ridge seemed to wait on his rhythm. I kept my palms steady and tried to breathe the way he did, slow, deep, like the world had all the time it needed. "How does this obey us?" I asked. "It doesn't obey," he said, not looking up. "It conspires with whatever stands in harmony." Harmony, another word I hadn't used in years. Hours slipped. The wind stiffened. I lost feeling in my fingers but didn't move. When Elia finally stepped back, the gash had become a faint pearly scar. The craft exhaled, so did I. We trudged to the edge of the clearing to gather fallen branches for a small fire. The sky had turned the peculiar violet of northern afternoons, color that exists for 10 minutes and then vanishes like a memory. I struck a match, cupping it from the wind, and the flame shivered to life. Elior crouched beside me, warming hands that didn't seem to need warmth. "You spoke of signs," I said, "of something near." He fed a twig to the flame and watched it take. "Proximity is a language of hearts more than clocks," he said. "Yet even in your measures, it is soon." I stared into the fire until the world beyond it blurred. "You keep saying light. People will expect a man in clouds, trumpets, fury." "What returns is what made trumpets and men," he answered. "You, Daniel, will not be asked to understand it, only to recognize it." "Recognize how?" He didn't answer. He looked through the trees toward my lake, frozen to a sheet of hammered pewter. A line of wind whipped snow across it in a silver serpent. Then he stood, offered me his hand. "Come. Your willingness has earned you the first doorway." We left the fire hissing in the snow. Back at the craft, he touched the hull, and a section unfurled like the petal of an iron flower. Inside, there were no chairs, no screens, only a chamber that felt like the inside of a bell. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the day was dry and bitter. Light pulsed from nowhere in particular, soft, breath-like. I hesitated at the threshold. Elior's face softened. "No harm will come to you. Not here." I stepped in. The door sealed without sound. The floor warmed beneath my boots, and gravity loosened its grip just enough that my bones remembered childhood, when running felt like flying, and falling didn't mean breaking. Elia stood opposite me, one hand raised. "Do not try to see," he said. "Let seeing happen." The chamber dimmed to twilight. My heart pounded in my throat. Then the walls, if they were walls, began to thin. The trees outside bled through, black brushstrokes against snow. Beyond them, the lake spread like a mirror. But it wasn't the lake I knew. Under the ice, light moved. Not reflected, moving. It gathered into threads extending toward the shore, toward the pines, toward me. Each thread hummed a tone I felt along my skin. Where the tones overlapped, colors bloomed, notes made visible. The forest was full of music I had never heard because I'd been deaf to it. I laughed without meaning to, then covered my mouth like a child who'd spoken in church. "You are witnessing correspondence," Elior whispered. "Matter answering spirit, spirit answering matter. This is the ordinary state of things, not the exception." The lake brightened. Under the ice, a shape rose. The ghost of a river I had crossed with my wife the autumn before she died. My chest clamped. I could smell her hair, spruce and smoke. I reached instinctively, and the chamber trembled with my longing. "Is she—" "No," Eliar said gently, "but the love you shared is alive." Love never returns to silence. Tears burned hot in the cold room. The shape faded, leaving a quiet so complete I thought my heart would stop. In that quiet, another light formed, not outside but within. It wasn't a picture. It was a presence, small as a coal, certain as sunrise. The more I noticed it, the warmer it burned, until I wanted to kneel and did. I didn't hear a voice. I knew a sentence. "I am nearer than your breath." My palms pressed to the floor. Heat climbed my arms like I'd plunged them into sunlight. Memories I'd boarded up, hospitals, empty chairs, winters that lasted too long, softened at the edges and let go their thorns. I exhaled a sound that was not quite a sob. Eliar's hand hovered above my shoulder, not touching, steady as a lighthouse. "This is the beginning of recognition," he said. "When the light returns openly, it will feel like this across a world." The chamber brightened gently, as if not to shock me back. The trees came back into view, the violet sky, the small curl of smoke where our fire hissed itself to sleep. The door petaled open. Evening had crept in while time in the craft had stood like a held breath. Outside, the wind had softened. I looked at my hands. They weren't different, but they were, as if the blood had learned a new rhythm. "What did you show me?" I asked, voice hoarse. "Not a show," Eliar said. "A permission." We stood in the snow until stars pricked through the bruised sky. For once, the cold didn't reach me. Something warmer did, steady, quiet, like a lamp set in a window you'd forgotten was yours. "Tomorrow," he said, turning back to the vessel, "we finish the work, and then, Daniel, you will see the Liminal." "The what?" He smiled like a man about to open a long, locked door. "The place where heaven practices its return." Morning came blue and brittle, the kind of cold that makes wood sing. Eliar stood beside the vessel with his palm on the hull, like a man greeting a trusted animal. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But yes." The doorway unfurled for us. Inside, the chamber felt wider than it had yesterday, as if it had stretched to meet what I was about to learn. Eliar motioned for me to stand at the center. "The Liminal is not a place," he said. "It is a threshold, where what you believe and what is true shake hands. Step without forcing." The floor warmed. My breath slowed on its own. The walls thinned again, but this time they did not show my forest. They showed between, a softness like dawn, not light, not darkness, potential. A tone, low and patient, rose from nowhere and everywhere. When I'd lost my wife, silence had felt like emptiness. This was silence with a pulse. I had the instinct to name it, to grab it with words and keep it still. Eliar must have felt that twitch in me. "Don't pin the butterfly," he whispered. "Let it land." The tone gathered into many tones, a slow chord that adjusted to my breathing until my ribs seemed to play along. Around me, filaments appeared, threads of brightness moving at different speeds, some quick as sparks, others deliberate as glaciers. Each thread carried a memory, a prayer, a choice. When two crossed, there was a soft bell sound, and a new path unfurled from their meeting. I realized I was watching causes learning to become kindness. A cool current brushed my cheek. I turned, and the Liminal opened sideways. I saw a hospital corridor at night, the pale wash of fluorescent lights, a woman asleep in a chair with shoes kicked off, a paper cup cooling in her hand. I didn't know her, but I felt the ache in her spine, the stubborn love in her posture. A thread from her heart brightened, and somewhere far from that corridor, a boy set down a knife he had been meaning to use on himself and chose to call his sister instead. The liminal hummed approval. Connection, invisible and exact. I wanted to fall to my knees again. "You are witnessing the grammar of return," Elia said, mercy conjugating itself. The scene dissolved like frost under breath. Now I was above the earth, not in miles but in meaning. The planet turned like a lantern, and I saw places where the light pooled, kitchens where someone cooked for a neighbor, cold doorways where a blanket had been tucked around sleeping shoulders, grief shared without advice. The glow spread along those threads and echoed back, stronger every time it was received without pride. "Is this what you meant by soon?" I asked. "Soon is the moment a chord has enough notes to be itself," he said. "The return is not an invasion, it is a resonance. When enough hearts hold the tone, the veil thins everywhere at once." Trumpets, I thought. How Scripture always spoke of trumpets. I had imagined brass and thunder. What I saw was hearts tuning to one pitch until the world remembered the song it knew before it learned to be afraid. Another current moved through me, warmer, like sunlight through closed eyelids. In it, I sensed a warning, gentle but firm. "There will be noise," Elio said, as if answering the thought I hadn't formed. "Fear will imitate this with spectacle. You will know the difference because truth leaves warmth, imitation leaves hunger." The threshold brightened. Far below, storms swirled. Far above, a slow-breathing vastness pressed no weight at all. I sensed presences in that breadth. Others like Elior, many, moving the way good nurses move in a ward at midnight. Quiet, competent, attentive to breath. I felt gratitude for them like heat in my chest. It surprised me. I didn't think I had much gratitude left. "Why show me?" I asked. "I'm just a man in a cabin with tools and ghosts." Elior's answer came with the softness of snow and the precision of a scalpel. "Because you chose compassion at the fence between fear and love. We do not look for the famous. We look for hinges." Hinges. Doors open because small metal pieces do their work in the dark. I could live with that. The liminal deepened. Time loosened until memories and prophecies shared a chair. I smelled wood smoke from a winter that hadn't happened yet. I felt a child's hand, no child I knew, slip into mine with the authority of belonging. When I tried to see her face, the threshold fluttered like a startled bird. I let go. The bird settled. Then it came. Not a figure, not a scene, but a nearness that made language shy. The small coal I'd felt in Act 3 flared and did not burn me. It was as if a room inside my chest opened its shutters and fresh air rushed in. Ordinary, holy, identical. I didn't hear a name. I didn't need one. Everything that hurt in me lined up and stopped shouting. "When he comes openly, it will feel like this everywhere," Elio said. Not aloud, but through the very texture of the moment. Not a man descending from a cloud to be argued about, but presence recognized inside the ones who are looking with love. My throat worked around tears I didn't release. I didn't want to disturb the surface of it. I stood very still and let the warmth teach me where my edges had been too sharp. The tones softened. The threads dimmed to a kind afterglow. The liminal folded like a map someone knows by heart. The chamber's walls remembered themselves, and gravity returned like a friend who had gone to get the truck. The door opened to Yukon dusk, all amethyst and iron. I stepped out shaky and utterly steady. Snow asked for my footprints and got them. "What do I do with this?" I asked, voice rough. Elior studied the horizon. "Live as if the threshold is under your feet," he said, "and finish helping me. We leave at first light." "Leave where?" He smiled, a secret handed to a child who can finally keep it. "To the place where the light rehearses being seen. And then, Daniel, you will understand why the return cannot fail." First light came thin and pewter, smudging the treetops with ash. I packed what little a man like me needs: knife, matches, a photo of my wife that I keep in a tin, then left them on the table because none of it felt necessary where we were going. Elio stood by the vessel as if he'd been waiting for centuries, not hours. He nodded once. We entered. The chamber received us like a held breath let go. No roar, no thrust, just the quiet certainty of a boat pushing off from shore. The lake, the pines, the cabin slid away without moving. I felt no speed and every speed at once, as if distance had unhappened. "Do not reach forward," Elio said softly. "Let forward come to you." The walls became that same living twilight, Liminal's cousin, but today it carried a steadier note, low and golden, like a cello string tuned to the earth itself. The air cooled, then grew warm from within, and a fragrance rose. Rain on stone, bread in an oven, wood smoke in winter. My body recognized it before my mind did. I'd smelled it at hospital doors when strangers shared coffee at 3 a.m. It'd on job sites when men lifted without being asked. Beside my wife the night she said, "Even now we are held." The twilight parted. We arrived, not in a place exactly, but in a between that wore a place like a well-tailored coat. A wide plain stretched out, seeded with small lights like campfires seen from far away. Overhead, no stars, only a deepness that felt attentive. The ground under my boots wasn't dirt or stone. It yielded like turf and steadied like oak. I looked for walls and found horizon. "Where are we?" I whispered. "Where welcome is practiced," Elio said, "where presence rehearses being received." He led me toward one of the campfires. As we neared, I realized it wasn't fire but gathered noticing. A pool of attention so warm it gave off light. In it, forms flickered the way faces flicker behind your eyelids when you almost fall asleep, not fully drawn, yet entirely known. Kneeling felt right, so I did. Elio stood beside me like a witness. No voice spoke. Still, what came next was speech in the only language wide enough to hold it. Recognition. At first it was small, a coal under ribs, just as before. Then the coal breathed. The warmth moved through me with perfect manners, asking nothing, giving everything. Memories rose like geese taking off. My father's rough hands showing me how to true a bent axle. The first time I saw the northern lights and thought the world was bleeding colors. The last time my wife laughed so hard she hid her face in my shoulder. Each memory touched the warmth and unclenched, losing its barbs but not its truth. A sentence formed without words. I am not arriving. I have always been here. My throat tightened. The presence did not press. It accompanied. Every place I had kept sealed, rooms of anger, closets of shame, a long hallway of private vows I'd failed, opened, not by force, but because the hinges had finally been oiled. I expected judgment. I received clarity. It wasn't leniency. It was exact mercy. The kind that names a wound and puts a clean bandage on it with steady hands. Tears came, but they weren't the kind that drown. They were the kind that rinse. I heard myself whisper, Jesus, not like a password, but like a name you suddenly remember belongs to your oldest friend. Elio did not interrupt. The plane around us thrummed, and for a blink I saw others, far, near, maybe neither, moving through their own pools of attention. Some wore bodies, some were simply brightness with the reliability of a heartbeat. Across that expanse, a truth landed. The return is not a parade, it is adoption papers signed in a million hearts at once. Images, not pictures, more like understandings, passed cleanly through me. A woman in a grocery line putting back milk she can't afford, and a stranger behind her saying, "Put it back in." The pen on the papers in a different city loosens its refusal, a fisherman throwing back the too small catch though no one is watching, and a judge days later finds courage to commute a sentence that expected no mercy. A boy sitting alone on a stairwell, deciding not to send the cruel message. Somewhere a rumor dies unborn. None of these acts were big enough for headlines. All of them rang the same note. This was trumpet, this was cloud, this was coming. "Why cloak it?" I asked, voice shredded down to honesty. "Why not tear the sky and end debate?" Elio's answer arrived as a warmth against the question's chill. "Because love that does not honor freedom is not love, and the one who returns is love without remainder. Spectacle coerces, presence invites. The world is being taught to answer an invitation." Another knowing. There will be counterfeits. Flash, threat, bargains dressed as blessings. I felt the texture of them, hungry, hurried, cold at the edges. In contrast, the present stayed patient and well-fed, as if eternity had eaten and was content to wait for me to finish chewing. "How will we know?" I asked. The warmth answered by being itself. "You will know by the residue. Truth leaves courage and rest. Imitation leaves panic and appetite. Something in me, an old knot of cynicism, tried to form an objection. It melted before I could admire it. In its place stood a quiet task: go home different enough to be useful and ordinary enough to be believed. The pool of attention gradually dimmed, not away, but into me. The plane's lights wavered like fireflies in tall grass. I became aware of my knees, my breath, the weight of my coat, how the sacred loves bodies and refuses to despise them. I turned to Elio. He was watching me with a look I had seen on hospice nurses and good mechanics, tender, exact, unconcerned with glory. "What now?" I asked. "Now you carry," he said. "Not arguments, temperature. Your work is to keep warm what you have been warmed by." He lifted his hand, and the horizon leaned closer. The chamber remembered us. The plane receded like tide. The cello note softened to a promise. When the walls were walls again, I could still smell rain on stone. We stood facing each other in the vessel's quiet. "He did not come to you," Elior said gently. "You came to where you could finally notice him." I nodded, because anything more would have been decoration. Outside, Yukon morning was bright as a blade. Inside, I was not the man who had stepped in. "Soon?" I asked, one last time. Not for a date, but for courage. Elior's eyes held mine. "Soon enough that how you treat the next person you see matters eternally." The door opened. Cold rushed in. I welcomed it like a sacrament. The day after the revelation, everything looked the same, and none of it did. The stove still ticked as it cooled. The dogs still circled their bowls like devout parishioners. Out on the lake, wind combed the snow into long, white braids. But beneath the ordinary, something hummed, a pitch I could match just by remembering to be kind. Elio stood by the door, coatless as always, regarding my tools on the wall like a man reading a psalm. "You have many instruments," he said. "Most of them for fixing what a man breaks," I answered. He smiled. "Then you will understand what I show you now." We walked to the clearing. The craft, mended to a moon's sheen, opened like a quiet thought. Inside, the chamber held us as if it had been waiting specifically for this conversation. We did not rise, not in the way I'd name flight. Instead, distance gently excused itself, and the Yukon stepped back to give room. The walls breathed twilight again, but today the color carried stories, streaks, knots, bright stitches. "What am I seeing?" I asked. "The weave," Elia said. "The song of many civilizations learning to keep company with the same light." Threads flared. Worlds, I realized, each with its own rhythm. Some pulsed slow and deep, like drums in caves. Others flickered quick as birds. I felt languages without words, architectures made to teach patience, laws tuned for mercy instead of punishment. 1,000 ways to say welcome. Are they like us? The question surprised me as it left my mouth. I'd never cared about aliens in science fiction terms. I cared now the way a farmer cares who his neighbors are when a fire starts. "Like and not like," Elio said. As maple is like oak by being tree, the measure is not bone or skin. The measure is whether they can host the presence without trying to own it. The weave brightened in one quadrant, and I saw a desert under 3 moons where people built homes with shade as the central room. Every doorway faced the neighbor's garden, so gossip had to pass through beauty to become words. On a water world, schools were taught in boats that tied together at dusk so the children learned tide and math at once. In a city cut into a cliff of onyx, judges listened with their hands in bowls of warm water. If anger cooled the water, they recused themselves. Hospitality as pedagogy, justice as temperature regulation. My chest ached with a homesickness for places I'd never been. "Do they know him?" I asked softly. "By names you do not have, and one you do," he said. "They are not waiting for a face. They are learning to stay open long enough for love to finish its sentence." The weave trembled. A darker color rolled through it, a showy flare, trumpet loud and empty at the center. I knew it before Elior named it. "Spectacle," he said. "The sickness that confuses attention with devotion." I watched a king on a far world promise peace if his people would kneel and surrender their discernment. I watched lights arranged to mimic awe. It looked impressive, like lightning. It left the taste of tin. In another place, a prophet with smooth hands sold fear in the name of safety, offering secret knowledge that required contempt to keep. Wherever spectacle spread, the threads thinned. Wherever quiet acts returned, bread left on doorsteps, widows escorted across dangerous markets, the weave thickened again, resilient as scar tissue. "How have we survived this long?" I whispered, ashamed and relieved both. "Because the choir is larger than the soloists," Elior said. "Because a mother humming over a sick child outranks the speech of a proud man in every ledger that matters." The chamber shifted. I saw the long hallway of human history in a narrow slice, the Magi charting a sky that behaved like a parable, a nameless monk in winter copying a text by candle and loaning the candle to a stranger, a mechanic in a northern garage tightening a bolt he could have left loose and telling no one why. Thread, 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 not saints carved in marble, neighbors. I realized the weave did not glorify the exceptional. It multiplied the faithful small. Tears pricked hot, and I let them sit unshed. "What do you want from me?" I asked, the old knot of unworthiness loosening with the honesty of the question. "Not from you," Elior said, and the gentleness in his voice unstrung me. "For you. For you to live like a hinge. For you to tune rooms by entering them. For you to believe that temperature is transferable." Transferable? Warm someone until they can hold warmth alone. Then let go. Love does not hoard. The weave dimmed to a soft afterglow. I felt tired in a good way, like after stacking wood with friends. The chamber remembered being a room again. Outside, afternoon leaned toward gold. Before we stepped out, Elior paused. "There is one more thing," he said. "Some of your kind will ask to worship beings like me. Do not let them." "I won't," I said, surprised at the conviction in my voice. "Good. We are couriers, not kings. Bow where the warmth comes from." We walked back across the snow, leaving a pair of tracks that the wind immediately began to edit. At the porch, I held the door for him out of reflex. He inclined his head like I'd done something ceremonial. That evening, I drove the long road to town for diesel and flour. At the store, the cashier, a kid with acne and a patchy mustache, fumbled my change and flushed red. "Sorry," he mumbled, braced for my impatience. "Take your time," I said, and meant it like a blessing. He exhaled. The air in that small transaction warmed half a degree. I felt the weave answer, a faint bell through drywall and winter coats. On the way home, the northern lights unfurled in green curtains. For once, I didn't reach for meaning. I let the sky have its show, and I practiced the only thing I was sure of now, keeping the warmth lit where I stood until someone else could see by it. The world did not change in any measurable way that night, but the choir felt closer and I drove slower, as if not to wake a sleeping house. Snow squeaked under my boots the way it only does when the cold has sharpened beyond reason. The cabin windows held small squares of yellow, a quiet promise in a world of white. After the weave and the hidden choir, after seeing how mercy stitches itself across distances, coming home felt like stepping into a photograph, still framed, almost too simple to be true. Inside, the stove ticked its metronome. The dogs thumped their tails, and then, sensing the different air around me, settled as if church had begun. I poured water into the kettle and watched the frost lift from the glass. Everything ordinary announced itself with dignity. I set 2 mugs on the table without thinking. Elior stood by the shelf where I keep my wrenches, reading their shapes like a librarian reads spines. "You kept the warmth," he said, not as praise but as diagnosis. "I tried," I answered. "It's like holding a candle cupped in both hands while you open a door." He considered that. "Yes, and the trick is to let the door stay open without blaming the wind." We ate in companionable silence, bread, cheese, apples cut into careful quarters. The meal felt ceremonial because we let it. Halfway through, the dogs lifted their heads at once and stared at the door. I heard wheels on snow, the slow crunch of a truck negotiating ruts. A knock followed. Apologetic, 2 beats, then 1. I opened to find Tom Benton, my nearest neighbor, hat in hand, shame in his eyes. We've traded tools and silences for years. Whenever we spoke, it was mostly about weather. Tonight, he tried to speak and failed. He looked smaller in the doorway than a big man should. "Evening," I said, stepping aside. He hesitated when he saw Elior. Anyone would. But whatever he needed was heavier than confusion. "Can we talk?" Tom asked, glancing between us. My boy Levi, he's been not right. Won't come out of his room. Says there's no point." I thought he'd shake it. He hasn't. He swallowed and added softer, "I don't know how to help." There it was, the threshold, knocking like a polite neighbor. I felt the weave vibrate faintly under the floorboards. Not a vision, not a miracle with trumpets, just a man telling the truth without ornament. "Sit," I said. "Tea?" He nodded. I poured, and the steam wrote brief psalms in the air. Elia stood very still, the way pine stands in wind, attentive without intruding. "Tell me what you've tried," I asked. Tom blew on his tea and stared into the cup like it might hand him a script. "Talked at him. That didn't work. Took his phone, made it worse. Told him to work harder on the farm. He did, and then slept for 16 hours. I'm not good at this," he said, voice cracking on the admission. "Mary was good at this. His wife, dead these 3 winters. He never said her name. Tonight the room made space for it. I didn't have advice, I had warmth. It felt like a tool more than a feeling, a thing you lay under a sagging beam so the house can breathe again." "Would it help if I came by tomorrow?" I asked. "We could fix the rattle in your west window together, or not fix anything at all. Just sit." Tom didn't answer right away. His shoulders dropped a fraction, like a backpack had shifted off the worst of the weight. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that'd help." He covered his face with his palm, embarrassed by relief, and let out a long-held breath. In the quiet that followed, I sensed Ilia as presence more than person, a steady temperature in the room, no light shows, no cosmic pronouncements, just agreement with the smallest, bravest version of help. Tom left with a bag of apples and the promise of 9 in the morning. The dogs returned to their appointed corners. I closed the door and rested my forehead against the wood. For a moment, the ordinary and the holy became the same size. "This is what carrying looks like," Elia said behind me. "Not spectacle. Frequency. I can do this, I said, surprised to hear certainty in my own voice. I can keep rooms warm. You already are. He walked to the window and looked at the sky. Green curtains were starting to move. Soon I go, he added, and the words fell gentle but unarguable. My chest tightened. Will I see you again? In the way that matters, he said. Indoors you hold. In the way a kettle sings when someone needs tea and you hear it. We spent the rest of the evening tending to small things, tightening the latch on the back door, laying a fresh line of kindling, mending a split handle on an old snow shovel. Each fix felt like an agreement with winter and with life. I'm here, I'm paying attention. I will not let this place come apart if my hands can help it. Before sleep, I stepped outside. The aurora unfurled, green on black, and the cold took my breath in the good way. Far off, a coyote called, answered by another, then quiet again. I thought of Levi staring at his door, and of Mary's name finally said aloud, and of Tom's shoulders lowering that fraction. The choir was not far. It was at the edge of my porch. I went back in and banked the fire low. Elia stood by the table, palm resting on my wife's photograph tin. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, I echoed. I slept without dreams, or maybe the dream was simply this. The door stayed ajar all night, and no wind could snuff the candle. Morning came like forgiveness, quiet, unearned, complete. I drove to Tom's place while the frost still stitched lace on fence wires. The world had the crispness of a page about to be written on. When I knocked, Tom opened with the face of a man pretending last night hadn't happened. He's in his room, he said, voice husky. Door closed. Good, I answered, surprising myself. Let's not open it yet. We fixed the west window first, the one that sang in the wind. We worked without chatter, the way men do when words would bruise something tender. When the latch finally caught true, the howl quieted to a hum. Tom exhaled, shoulders dropping that familiar fraction. We brewed coffee that tasted like courage and sat at the kitchen table, letting the kettle's ghosty steam mark time. After a while, the bedroom door down the hall opened. Footsteps. A boy, no, a young man stood there, hair wild, eyes swollen from sleep or not sleep. Levi. He hovered at the threshold as if a tripwire ran along it. Windows fixed, I said, like that was the map we'd all decided to follow. He nodded, took a few steps in, sat. We spoke of nothing important, the price of diesel, a coyote with only 3 good legs that had been getting into the compost, the ridiculous way the northern lights had shown off last night. None of it was medicine. All of it was. I watched warmth behave like a patient animal. Given room, it settled, put down its head, breathed. Levi's fingers stopped twitching. Tom's knee stopped bouncing. A small thing happened then, so small anyone could miss it. Levi reached for the mug. His father slid toward him, not like a surrender, but like a decision he could afford. I didn't tell them about aliens or thresholds or the weave. I didn't say Jesus had filled me with a heat that burned judgment clean without leaving ash. I didn't need to. The room knew. When I left, Tom walked me to the truck and stood there, hat in his hands, trying to build a sentence big enough for what he felt. He failed well. Thank you, he said. Tomorrow, I answered, as if we'd made a contract with the future. We had. Back at my cabin, Elior was waiting outside, face turned toward the sun that hadn't warmed anything yet. The craft stood behind him, heeled to a sheen that made the snow around it look like a sketch. He glanced at me, and in that look I understood. We were at the hinge of goodbye. Will you walk with me? He asked. We crossed the lake, where the wind had combed fine lines into the snow. Everything glittered like truth. In the middle of that white world, he stopped. No speeches, just the kindness of a steady presence, letting me arrive at the leaving on my own feet. I want to say I'm ready, I started, but I don't think I am. Readiness is not a feeling, he said. It is consent. He placed his hand over my heart, the way he had by the craft on that first morning. The heat that answered wasn't otherworldly now. It was ours. The same warmth that had sat with Tom and Levi, the same note that hummed in the store when the cashier dropped my change. I realized I had been afraid that the presence might fade when Ilior left, the way campfire smell leaves your clothes. It didn't fade. It recognized itself and deepened. You asked me once, why you, he said. Here is the answer you will remember when you forget everything else, because in the moment of choice, you chose compassion. Return begins wherever compassion holds. He stepped back, the space between us widening in meaning if not in feet. There will be noise, he reminded me softly, spectacle with the temperature of ice. You will know what is true by the residue, courage and rest. I nodded, the words already living in me like marrow. And one more thing, he added, almost like a friend trying to leave and remembering another kindness. Do not hoard wonder, spend it in small coins. Tea, a fixed latch, a name spoken aloud so grief has somewhere to sit. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because joy had suddenly found a chair. Hinge, I said, tasting the word without flinching. I can be one. He tilted his head in that way he had when agreement felt like blessing. Then the air changed, a soft thickening like the moment before snow commits. The craft opened without sound. For a second I thought he might step in and vanish like breath on glass. Instead he paused, touched 2 fingers to the brim of an invisible hat, and spoke my name as if it had always meant room for others to rest. Daniel. Ilior, I answered. And in the saying there was no ache, only gratitude dressed as ache. Light gathered, not blinding, not theatrical, more like the brightness a good memory leaves behind your eyes. The vessel folded the landscape politely and was gone. The lake quivered once and remembered being solid. Silence returned, not empty this time, but alive, a choir holding a note you can join if you choose. I walked back to the cabin. The dogs greeted me like prophets who had seen it all coming. I made tea because kettles have learned to be altar bells, and I sat at the table where my wife's photograph tin keeps our vows from slipping out of sight. Outside, the world minded its business. A raven argued with its echo, a drift softly slumped. The sun failed, as usual, to do much about the cold. Everything ordinary kept being trustworthy. Here is my testimony, the only one that matters enough to write down. He did not arrive. I noticed him. He is returning, not as a spectacle to be debated, but as a temperature to be carried. If you want to know whether a thing is of him, check what it leaves in its wake, panic and appetite, or courage and rest. Then choose accordingly and keep choosing. Doors do not stay open by accident. When I finish this page, I will split kindling and take a bag of apples over to Tom's. We'll listen to the west window, not sing. Maybe Levi will come outside and help me reseat the steps that have sagged by the porch. No trumpets, no clouds torn apart, just warmth traveling hinge to hinge until the house of the world remembers how to welcome. Soon? Yes. Soon enough that how you treat the next person you see matters eternally.